Our speaker today is the General Counsel of Midjourney and the owner of Open Advisory Services, a boutique lawyer firm that provides fractional general counsel services to some of the most important AI startups. Before that, he spent 7 years leading the open source legal at Google. Please welcome Max Sills.
I'd like to talk to you about something a little more mundane, which is what I do all day, helping people buy and sell stuff. So my life is put into two buckets. I help people buy and sell stuff, mostly AI now, and then I help them think about processes around it. And at first this was really scary to me, and then it became fun. Now I enjoy doing it. What I notice is a lot of people who are new in the corporate context to using AI don't enjoy it and are having a very bad time. So let's talk about some of the reasons they might not be having a good time and what we can do. First, an introduction. I was really struck, before I started buying and selling AI, I was just buying and selling open source software over and over and over again. And I saw really interesting patterns that I think are pretty educational for how we transact AI. The first pattern is software was locked up and extremely proprietary, and everyone was really interested in keeping it closed. And then it was a commodity. That is what AI is. You're not buying and selling anything special anymore because it's completely commoditized. And if you think it's special, you're going to have a very bad time. You're buying a commodity. Thought, creativity, decision-making, these are commoditized. Just like open source, AI is now being distributed everywhere. And then finally, it scares your lawyer. And that's not good because your scared lawyer makes bad decisions and then you fight and you have a bad time. So we're going to go through step by step and see what we can do to make this process more enjoyable. Okay, so before you go outside, think inside about what's your thought process going to be as you approach this. And that might sound silly, but there are so many companies and good intentioned people that approach commercial deals before they get to this step, which is having a thought process and a rubric for making decisions. This is super important. The first thing is, what are you going to use the thing you're about to buy for? Are you going to use it to summarize data, to help you be creative? Or will the thing you buy be distributed outside your company? Just like in the software context. There's a huge difference between leasing software to do your taxes and leasing software because you want to resell it. There's different profit margins and there's also different liability profiles. You need to treat those things separately. And then finally, on this, AI is not a magic wand for liability, meaning it won't bankrupt you and it also won't magically make you not get sued. It's just a commodity. It's just like buying widgets. It's going to have the similar liability profile to anything else. So use the brain you had before when you used to weigh risks in a corporate context to think about how you might buy and sell it now. Okay, let's get a little more specific. So you've developed this rubric to think about how you might want to buy, sell, or consume it. And now you want to go and buy or sell it. So great. You're going to do a contract. This is wonderful. But this comes up a lot. This is the second reason people don't have a good time when they're buying and selling AI. They don't have good manners. And what does it mean to have bad manners when you're doing a deal? It means you don't understand what's reasonable to ask someone to do and what's not reasonable. So there's this concept of a cheapest cost avoider that I want to kind of bring up here. Let's say you have a tree in your yard and it falls over and hurts your neighbor. Well, you're going to have to pay for your neighbor's medical bills. And why is that? Because you were the cheapest cost avoider. The tree was on your land. You really should have known that it was starting to get rotten around the roots. And so when it injured someone, you should have known it was going to do that. But let's say instead of the tree rotting on your yard, some gophers come from your other neighbor's yard, and unbeknownst to you, they start nibbling at it, nibbling at the roots, and then it gets really bad. You're not really the cheapest cost avoider in that situation, right? Someone else is. And this is super important when you think about an AI transaction. Let's say you're going to buy some cloud compute because you want to sell a chatbot service to someone. Well, is it reasonable to try to force through contract that you'll be protected from every possible risk? Probably not. And yet I see this when there's a power imbalance from big companies to small companies all the time. And this stops deals, and then no one has fun. Your proofs of concept don't get off the ground. You can't agree on a deal, and everyone just feels really angry. And it's because you weren't being reasonable. If you think about what you want and think about how liability gets allocated, you can be more reasonable. And the final thing I want to think about here is really important. Indemnities, promises that someone will give you money if something goes wrong. So they're really not that good. They're false promises. Here's one paraphrased from many different cloud providers. So I'm not going to call anyone out. They're all the same. No one is doing a good job. We'll protect you if our artificial intelligence system hurts you, unless you should have known you'd get in trouble. Or someone threatened you. Or someone got confused. That's not good. This means that this will never happen. And yet, if you didn't think through both with your decision-making rubric and how you were going to be reasonable, how liability was supposed to be allocated, you might think this is good. And then what you did is you wasted a lot of time on decision-making, and then you didn't even make a very good decision because you got tricked by someone else's promise. Other people's promises don't stop you from having to behave reasonably. You need to still behave reasonably. Okay, and so this is the final point here is, this is the last reason why you might not be having a good time if you're trying to buy and sell AI. Going to the negotiating table and talking to someone outside your company should not be the first time that you talk to the other people in your company. That's a big problem. And yet, it happens all the time, at every level of expertise and at every size. Talk to each other. Make sure you have internally in your own company a good understanding of how you feel. And make sure that when you're asking partners to cover risks, you're doing that because you think that it's a risk that's reasonable for them to cover. Is the risk you're worried about, is it a systemic risk? It's a risk everyone in the world has to face? Or is this a risk that is just specific to them? It's reasonable to ask people to protect you from specific risks that their behavior could bring to you. It's not reasonable to ask them to protect you for systemic risks. For that, go buy insurance. Don't slow down the deal and make everyone confused and unhappy. So here's the first example. You want to sell some compute to someone for a credit monitoring application. Well, think about that. Is a person selling compute, should they be responsible for the implications of a decision-making machine determining whether someone should get a credit card or not? How do they have any idea what that output is? And really, you're all just going to use an open source model anyway and just host it on some rented GPUs and then resell that. So please be reasonable. How about a marketing campaign? This is different. If you're going to use some generated outputs and then put them at the end of the value chain, you need to think about how that might be received by your customers because it's going to be out in the wild. Should you get an indemnity from the person to make sure that if you do something that embarrasses you or confuses people, they'll protect you? No, of course not, because that wouldn't be reasonable. So in conclusion, AI is now a commodity. And if we recognize it's a commodity and assess with ourselves the difference between systemic and situational risks, then we can have a lot of fun buying and selling it. Okay, thank you.
Max Sills, everyone. No, stay here for 1 second. Is there a question from the audience?
Hey, thank you. Oh, wow, it's loud. You talked about kind of big enterprise companies and maybe startups. What happens with government agencies? So it's a startup working with a government agency.
Asking for a friend.
Okay.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah.
No, I'm building a B2B AI startup, but working with government agencies.
Yeah. So this is really, startups working with government agencies require a lot of capital and a lot of time. Because they're hit with two things. One, big entity and small entity. Big entity is scared. They're going to make the small entity promise a bunch of stuff that they can't. The small entity really wants money because it doesn't have any money. It's going to make promises it can't reasonably make. And so it's not. That's just a situation that's not going to be any fun. You try to raise a lot of money, and you use that for regulatory and compliance experts that have experience with government sales. That's really going to be the majority of your capital expenditure there.
That'd be $2,500. Max Sills, everyone. Thank you, Max.